The adored Patricia Heaton, who played Debra Barone on the show that made her famous but also pushed her boundaries behind the scenes, has finally spoken up. Did you think Everybody Loves Raymond was just a joke? Rethink your thought. Personal breakdowns, secrets, stress, and unspoken truths were all present. What actually transpired with Heaton's co-stars? Was there a personal price for the success? And during the filming, what secret did she conceal? Patricia Heaton is at last prepared to share this tale. We're pulling back the laugh track to show what was actually happening, supported by first-hand recollections, behind-the-scenes production notes, and previously unreleased moments. Prepare yourself. Everything is altered by the truth. The set that everyone desired. The caustic one-liners, the fighting in-laws, and the comfortable familiarity of a suburban home where pandemonium never ventured far from the kitchen table are what most people associate with Everybody Loves Raymond. However, what transpired behind those scenes was equally as captivating as what the cameras saw. The atmosphere on the Everybody Loves Raymond set was different from that of a comedy. It was a furnace of conflicts between personalities, secrets, and sudden weakness. The cast had a distinct dynamic. To start, Ray Romano was adamant about telling the narrative correctly, even though he frequently portrayed the anxious husband behind the scenes. In his capacity as co-creator, he collaborated closely with showrunner Phil Rosenthal to extract content from actual family conflicts. In reality, a lot of the scenes that fans found funny were taken straight from Phil's disagreements with his wife, Monica. This implied that blocking lines wasn't the only thing that happened during rehearsals. The performances felt so genuine because they were about going back to actual emotional territory. Debra, played by Patricia Heaton, was juggling more than just the pressures of her role. She was pregnant while the show was on, but viewers were unaware of this. Producers made every effort to conceal Debra's condition from viewers because the pregnancies didn't fit with her plot. Among the show's cast, Brad Garrett was one of the funniest and had one of the most questionable backstories. He fought alcoholism in private at the start of this episode. Later on, he would acknowledge that he was what many call a high-functioning alcoholic, meaning that he kept the habit a secret from practically everyone on the set. He frequently performed on stage when intoxicated, relying on his gut feelings like a vaudeville act to get him through. The best timing, however, was insufficient to mask the internal battles he was engaged in. Fortunately, he made the decision to face those issues early on in the show's existence, and his sobriety only enhanced the sense of personal triumph that accompanied each of his Emmy-winning performances. Most people don't realize how difficult the rehearsal process was. Tuesdays and Wednesdays were rehearsal days, Thursdays were camera blocking, Mondays were script readings, and considerable adjustments were based on the responses of the actors and producers. The genuine thing, recorded in front of a crowd, would finally arrive on Friday. Particularly for Heaton and Garrett, who had to quickly transition their performances from the serious to the humorous, those days were full of long hours of demanding work. Occasionally, the audience's laughter served as the energy source that kept the actor going amid backstage stress and exhaustion. Then came those heart-pounding beats that nobody could have foreseen. Heaton survived the final episode's rehearsal before collapsing. After 9 years of operation, it was just too much to contain. An unforeseen wrinkle that demonstrated how deeply the cast was connected to the universe they had created together was the delay in the tape caused by her tears until she was able to recover her voice. It also marked the ascent of a reluctant star, and the first time the public recognized Patricia Heaton as more than simply a supporting character but as the emotional core of the program. Patricia Heaton had no intention of ruling primetime television. She was just another struggling actor in Los Angeles, balancing rejections, auditions, and raising a family, long before she lit up living rooms as the witty Debra Barone. Notoriety was never assured. In fact, it seemed unattainable for the majority of her early career. However, something about Raymond's Everybody Loves altered everything. Reluctantly, Heaton found herself in the spotlight. Patricia Heaton had already faced years of uncertainty before she was given the part that would define her career. She appeared on 30-something and had little parts in sitcoms, but nothing stuck. Heaton didn't have time to pursue popularity because she was a working mother with kids and expenses by the time the Raymond pilot appeared. Nevertheless, she and Ray Romano had an indisputable chemistry during the audition process. It wasn't just lines she was reading. She was matching him beat for beat, using a dry wit that seemed natural to ground his neurotic charm. However, securing the position was not a given. At first, Maggie Wheeler, whom many fans know as Janice from Friends, was the person CBS had in mind. Wheeler was a strong candidate for the role of Debra during her audition, but the producers finally determined she wasn't a good fit. They were won over by Heaton's blend of scathing sarcasm and maternal kindness. For a character who would have to deal with an overbearing mother-in-law, an ignorant husband, and frequent chaos from her in-laws, it was the ideal combination. Heaton was engrossed in the role and not trying to become famous when the cameras finally started rolling. She would claim that creating a brand was not as important to her as giving genuine performances. Sometimes she felt uneasy about becoming famous. She didn't play Hollywood games by courting attention or posing for photographers. On and off, her priorities were work, writing, and staying true to herself. She wasn't under any celebrity-style pressure, but it didn't stop the praise. For her work in the 9 seasons, Heaton was nominated for an Emmy Award each year from 1999 to 2005. She won the prize twice. She chose a more subdued route, even though many would have used the recognition to fight for bigger jobs or magazine covers. However, it wasn't always so simple. Notoriety brought scrutiny. Heaton's conservative beliefs frequently ran counter to both Hollywood's typical liberalism and those of her co-stars. According to her, there were tense moments with Peter Boyle, who portrayed Frank Marone. Despite their great regard for one another, they weren't always in agreement. But since they were true Raymonds, that's where the humor came in, and rather than arguing angrily, they could poke fun at each other. Heaton's public remembrance of Boyle upon his passing in February 2006 demonstrated that their bond extended beyond politics. Throughout it all, Heaton was the constant presence on the set. She provided consistency to a program that frequently referenced the absurdities of family life and real-world marital annoyances. When Heaton became angry at Ray's pranks, Debra felt real before he calmly warmed up. Additionally, Patricia would find herself in the midst of a storm she never requested when conflicts about creative direction and salaries started to escalate behind the scenes. One that would put her loyalty and boundaries to the test. What followed would show even more of the hesitant star's hidden light. Heaton's secret conflict. During the peak of Everybody Loves Raymond's popularity, the on-screen laughter concealed the internal conflicts that were taking place behind the scenes. The one Patricia Heaton had to deal with was the most subtly heartbreaking. She was portrayed to audiences as the cool-headed, witty Debra Barone, always prepared with a caustic retort. Few were aware, however, that her personal life was collapsing as she was giving Emmy-winning performances. She did not suffer a physical fall. It was intensely intimate, spiritual, and emotional. Heaton represented steadiness for years. A diligent actress, a loving mother, and a seemingly grounded person amid the Hollywood world. She was overburdened by the demands of juggling marriage, motherhood, and a rigorous television schedule. Alcohol provided a false sense of escape from the stress caused by late nights on set and the lonely character of celebrity. In public, it didn't spiral. She was high-functioning, if you will. No tantrums, no arrests, no headlines. However, she sensed that she was losing control on the inside. The burden of acting as though nothing was wrong became too much to bear. Even though there was never any scandal surrounding her, Heaton's closest friends and family were aware of the flaws. Drinking wasn't the only thing involved. The goal was to avoid, hide, and numb. With every season that went by, it was more difficult to reconcile the disparity between her calm TV appearance and her inner agony. She reached one turning point after another for herself with her silent acceptance. Patricia Heaton made the decision to stop drinking. It was for her children, her health, and her sanity, not for any cameras or publicity. As a result, she started attending meetings, creating a network of support, and confronting all the emotions she had been suppressing. Although this was a very personal matter for her, it did alter her perspective on her own life, her behavior, and her methods of working. Their silent pain brought them together. They never talked about specifics of their life together. However, it is evident that as time went on, a number of the Raymond cast members were dealing with personal issues in the midst of the hilarity. The audience sensed this very humanity in their stomachs but was never able to see it clearly. The actors' utilization of real-life experiences contributed to the audience's sense of realism, at least in part. The show's creator, Phil Rosenthal, claims that many of the episodes started out as real-life conflicts or emotions from his life. Real occurrences served as inspiration for both the writers and the actors. For Heaton, any scenario when Debra showed signs of vulnerability, weariness, or exasperation served as a trigger for more intense emotions. She found redemption in acting, which likely increased her credibility with other industry professionals. And everything the ensemble believed they knew about one another would be called into question by what transpired behind those studio walls, particularly in the show's last years. Behind the smile, the secret battles. Behind-the-scenes hostility was increasing more than ever as Everybody Loves Raymond neared its latter seasons. The show was still a ratings powerhouse on the surface. Every week, millions of people watched to see how the Barone family handled yet another awkward dinner or passive-aggressive altercation. However, backstage, things were changing and there was disagreement among the actors. What started off as friendly chat turned into conflict that some claim almost ruined the show's smooth finale. A widening gap in recognition and remuneration was at the core of the conflict. By February of 2003, Ray Romano was reportedly making $1,800,000 every episode, making him the highest-paid actor on television. The disparity between him and his co-stars was startling, but his skill and his status as co-creator made the boost justified. A portion of that, almost $160,000 every episode, was going to Brad Garrett, a beloved character who won an Emmy for his depiction of Robert. Not only was money at stake, but respect was also at stake. Garrett became quite irritated. He left the performance. Yes, temporarily, but the cast and crew were rocked by it. Professional at all times, Patricia Heaton apparently agreed with Garrett's choice. Other cast members, unwilling to keep working until a just settlement was achieved, subtly joined the protest. Negotiations were tight behind the scenes. CBS officials rushed to find a solution before the show's reputation was harmed by the consequences. The cast formed new arrangements and returned after a few weeks, but the wounds were already there. Despite the return of smiles to the screen, there was a subtext in those final seasons. The Raymond set was no longer characterized by the same camaraderie. Everyone became more cautious due to the long hours, the constant pressure to produce flawless episodes, and the impending conclusion of the series. The show's creator, Phil Rosenthal, acknowledged that the writing crew was worn out by the 9th season. In order to come up with new material, he famously joked that they would have to battle with their own spouses. The emotional toll was genuine, and the show was operating on creative fumes. Patricia Heaton, on the other hand, had to deal with the emotional burden of closure, which was very different. Debra Barone's 9-year run was coming to an end. Debra had a sharp sense of humor and a profound emotional depth. However, Heaton's persona went beyond the part. She represented Heaton's struggles, triumphs, and development. Emotions started to rise as the last season approached. There was no going back by the final episode's rehearsal. The actress lost her voice due to the tears she shed. Filming in front of a live audience had to be delayed. To say goodbye to a job was possibly one thing. Furthermore, it's possible that this was the release of 9 years' worth of tension, love, fear, and recovery. Since then, Heaton has added more. Television provided much more than just a career and a comfortable living in this area. But stability in an otherwise unstable personal environment, that is, during a period when she felt her identity was being dispersed and, most importantly, in her family, where things were dysfunctional, complex, and realistic. The rest of the cast felt the weight of that farewell. According to Doris Roberts, she has never collaborated with a cast that was so committed. In the last years of the show, Peter Boyle, who played Frank, kept his cancer diagnosis a secret from everyone save Roberts and a select group of producers. He had no desire for sympathy. He was not looking for favors. His goal was to finish strong. Knowing that gives the final episodes a deeper meaning. When the cameras were off, his comedy concealed the excruciating suffering he endured. Following the conclusion of the program, there were speculations about a potential Roberts spin-off and even suggestions of a reunion of the ensemble. However, nothing of that kind ever came to pass. Too much had been endured by the cast. In many respects, the chapter ended exactly as it should have. Romano played dramatic parts, Heaton walked out to play the center, and Garrett came back to the stage. Even though they were all following different courses, the events of those last several seasons remained with them. But there was more to Everybody Loves Raymond's secrets than conflict and strife. There were more light-hearted tales, secret pregnancies, genuine Easter eggs, and intimate moments that demonstrated how well the actors and crew guarded their own. And until Patricia Heaton eventually came clean, it was one of her personal secrets that had been kept the longest. Marginalized motherhood. On Everybody Loves Raymond, Patricia Heaton played Debra Barone, a feisty, sharp-tongued character who had to balance a chaotic home, meddling in-laws, and a husband who frequently behaved like a fourth kid. But fans were unaware of the shocking secret hidden behind those well-timed one-liners and frustrated sighs. During the span of the show, Patricia Heaton became pregnant twice. And by concealing it in plain sight, the production crew accomplished an amazing trick. Heaton has 3 children at the time of filming. During such a hard period of her profession, she had not planned for additional children. However, life had other ideas. Producers were presented with a decision when she fell pregnant during the series. Find a means to keep the pregnancy off-screen or write it into the show. Debra was not intended to have any more children than the 3 she already had with Ray. Modifying that would upset the well-balanced family dynamic that is essential to the success of the show. The team therefore made the decision to completely remove Heaton's pregnancies from the plot, which resulted in some of the most inventive staging in the history of sitcoms. In order to hide Heaton's developing baby belly, camera crews started employing cunning techniques. She was frequently positioned behind big furniture, kitchen countertops, or thoughtfully placed props like giant handbags and laundry baskets. The wardrobe also changed. Deborah's customary fitted attire was swapped out for more relaxed, layered ensembles that concealed her growing body. The actual staging of scenes, known as blocking, was also changed. Heaton was instructed to sit more frequently or to stand in a way that would allow another character to partially block her view of the camera. The majority of audiences were unaware of these efforts since they were so seamlessly incorporated into the performance. No headlines, no speculations, no embarrassing storyline changes. The director, the costume department, and Heaton herself all put in a lot of work behind the scenes, and they all continued to achieve the same mark. The intensity and breadth of emotions that her admirers were accustomed to. It's a demanding undertaking. Heaton didn't expect the strain that came with concealing a pregnancy on a multi-camera sitcom in front of a live audience. In interviews, she once acknowledged that her persona was played at the time with extreme endurance and focus, concealing everything. Filming high-energy moments with precise comedic timing while dealing with the morning sickness, exhaustion, and emotional roller coaster of pregnancy. Even more astounding was the fact that neither the ardent fans nor the tabloids had abandoned the original studio audience after discovering the televised program. Heaton wouldn't publicly acknowledge her experiences or how she achieved such a remarkable equilibrium between the two realms until years later. As a result, she gained new admiration from both fans and colleagues. Not only as a model actor, but also as a working mother who consistently showed up, gave her all, and maintained her privacy without ever requesting preferential treatment. Deborah's sincerity was further enhanced by her ability to keep her real-life parenting apart from the role she acted. Heaton's off-screen experience as a mother affected every aspect of the scenario, even though Debra wasn't intended to be pregnant. Part of what gave the character such longevity was that subtle depth. Without fully understanding the entire scenario, viewers were able to sense the genuine gravity of her feelings and anger. However, Patricia Heaton kept other aspects of her life under wraps as well. Her name returned to the news spotlight a few years after the show ended due to an unexpected legal dispute. The lawsuit that damaged the actress's reputation also exposed a new side of her that was unrelated to her comedy laughter or scripted lines. Patricia Heaton's carefully cultivated image was upended by an unexpected headline just when it appeared that she had perfected the balancing act between her private life and her fame. For years after the conclusion of Everybody Loves Raymond, in February 2009, Heaton was embroiled in a legal battle that brought up awkward issues regarding her behind-the-scenes treatment of her closest friends and family members rather than her public persona or performances. Jennifer Lee, Heaton's former personal assistant, filed the case. Lee claimed that she only received $742 in unpaid pay, arguing that she was not fairly rewarded for the hours she worked. The principle was what attracted attention, not the sum. California has stringent labor rules, particularly with regard to overtime work by hourly workers. Furthermore, the allegation that a Hollywood celebrity had inadvertently or willfully broken such norms elevated a minor disagreement into a public spectacle. Lee said in the filing that she had frequently been expected to finish projects that extended well into the evenings and weekends, working significantly more hours than had been agreed upon. She said that the pay she did get did not correspond to the number of hours she had actually worked, and she was not provided breaks or paid overtime. Despite its limited reach, the case struck a chord because it called into question the public's belief that Heaton was a just, sensible, and morally pure person. Instead of discussing the case in detail, Heaton's team opted to keep the legal proceedings under wraps. However, in Hollywood, even quiet may become a drama in and of itself. The rumors started to circulate. Was this a simple administrative error or a sign of a more serious problem with how celebrities handled their personal employees? While some industry insiders agreed that mismanagement between talent and their private employees occurs more frequently than the public realizes, particularly in a world where personal assistants frequently conflate professional and personal support, others defended Heaton, describing her as professional and respectful. Fans found the incident even more startling because Heaton has been openly supporting conservative causes for years. She frequently discussed faith, family, and individual accountability. Some people felt that the costume contradicted all of the ideals she so boldly displayed. Others took it as a warning that even well-known people with a polished, morally upright exterior were just as blind, human, and prone to mistakes as everyone else. There is no evidence that the lawsuit progressed into a protracted legal battle. As is customary, it discreetly settled out of the public light and out of the media's prying eyes. For Heaton, however, it serves as a warning. In no way is celebrity status exempt from labor regulations, and workers who increasingly work under cover of anonymity do not necessarily have the same level of protection in the event of an issue. Regardless of the employer's status, California's legal system guarantees that even domestic workers can seek compensation if they believe they have been wronged. The public's opinion of Patricia Heaton was also altered by this lawsuit. Until then, she was a popular, mostly sardonic TV mother and a conservative voice in Hollywood who opposed the dominant liberal worldview. Suddenly, viewers would recall that, like her character Debra's life, Heaton's life contained genuine power struggles, tensions, and personal difficulties that would never be depicted in a sitcom screenplay. In stark contrast to the composed persona that kept 2 pregnancies a secret during the run of her popular program. This fact would not be concealed with the aid of props. Heaton's career was not significantly impacted by the case. She made a comeback to television following the court case, most notably as Frankie Heck on the Middle, which almost seemed to be an insult to the legendary actress's every motherly failing. Seemingly prepared to distance themselves from the performance and the scandal, television audiences kept tuning in. Well done. Neither her public character nor the work she was doing were altered by it. However, it wasn't pregnancy rumors or legal problems this time. The item was even more susceptible. Her path to recovery from a personal, enduring battle. One final message: gossip and legacy. As an Emmy-winning actress, a loving wife and mother, and a rare conservative voice in a notoriously liberal field, Patricia Heaton was long seen as a lady with it all together. However, Heaton made a shockingly intimate admission in 2020, long after Everybody Loves Raymond had concluded and her follow-up sitcom The Middle had concluded. For years, she struggled with a covert alcohol addiction, and almost anyone anticipated it. Heaton talked candidly about her resolve to quit drinking after recognizing that her drinking had subtly started to take over her life in an interview and a series of Instagram posts. She claimed that it had been a background habit for years. Cocktails to relax, wine during social gatherings, and the occasional glass to commemorate a hard day's work. But eventually, the odd drink turned into a habit. Then it was required. It eventually became an issue. At a dinner party, she recounted a pivotal moment. After pouring herself her usual, she began to question whether the alcohol was actually doing more harm than good. Neither an intervention scene nor a dramatic crash occurred. It was a silent understanding that she was losing her clarity, attention, and health. She was no longer the life of the party. It frightened her since she was someone who had trouble maintaining control. Heaton found it particularly challenging to face this internal struggle because he was raised in a devout Catholic home and frequently advocated for moral clarity in public. Alcohol had evolved into a coping mechanism for the emotional strain of middle life, motherhood, and Hollywood. However, it also went against how she saw herself. She was aware that she would gradually change into a different person if she didn't stop. Thus, she abruptly resigned. Going sober was not a professional move, a role, or a headline decision. It was so intimate. Additionally, it was mostly kept under wraps until she had been sober for over 2 years. Only then did she start talking about her experience in public, in part to hold herself accountable and in part to support others who might be fighting the same demon in private. "I don't miss the noise in my mind the following morning, but I do miss the buzz," she acknowledged in one post. In a world where celebrity confessions can feel staged or edited, her candor was refreshing. Heaton didn't try to portray her sobriety as heroic or portray herself as a victim. Rather, she spoke simply. Drinking was no longer enjoyable. Her tranquility had begun to be stolen by it. She knew she had to leave it as soon as she discovered that. The timing of her confession had a far bigger impact than the confession itself. Heaton, who was in her 60s, was part of an age group that sobriety movements don't typically consider. However, research indicates that women over 50 are drinking more than ever before, frequently as a means of avoiding the emotional distress and loneliness that come with aging. By speaking up, Heaton unintentionally entered a field where more and more women are choosing clarity over resentful numbness. In certain situations, people should remain mute despite what society expected of them. It also clarified her past dramas. The close relationship she had with co-star Peter Boyle, who supported her through her worst moments, as well as the assistant lawsuit and its hints of deeper personal issues, gave fans a fresh perspective on earlier press accounts. As a result, it became evident that Heaton's seemingly flawless public persona might have been hiding a complex, very personal struggle of her own. It's interesting to note that sobriety even affected her attitude to writing subsequent characters. Heaton played a retired teacher who began a new job in medicine for Carol's second act. A figure that reflects Heaton's own life transformation. Her performance was grounded, and many of her supporters and detractors may have seen her composure and self-awareness for the first time. She would also support others. She occasionally tweeted that being sober was a matter of freedom rather than shame. "You can always start over. Today may be the first day," she wrote. Thousands of followers, many of whom might have been silently considering the same issues regarding their own behaviors and well-being, received a signal from those few words. Ultimately, Patricia Heaton's legacy remained unaffected by her disclosure. Rather, it made it stronger. It further pushed the woman's relatability from weakness to strength. Behind the closed barren doors were true stories that permanently changed the lives of those involved, despite the fact that Everybody Loves Raymond appeared to be the ideal sitcom. What aspect of Heaton's behind-the-scenes experience caught you off guard the most? In the current Hollywood environment, do you believe the show could have survived? Tell us in the comments section. To ensure you never miss a reveal, remember to like, subscribe, and press the bell if you enjoy in-depth explorations of the little-known tales of your favorite celebrities. And continue to observe. The following film on your screen delves even farther into the unexpected Hollywood facts.